This is Douglas Academy, Curriculum for Excellence, English Department, and we're looking at S2, close reading, and there are 3 booklets. We're starting with booklet 1, purpose and audience questions. You could do the booklets in different order. First of all, I'd like you to read pages 1 and 2 of booklet 1 and answer all the questions that you find in page 2. So here are some answers to page 2, combining questions 1 about types of text and question 3 about their purpose. So first of all, things that you might have written. Last year, you would have written a personal reflective essay describing your experiences and what you learned from them. More recently, with Lamb to the Slaughter, you wrote a critical essay quoting evidence from the text and analysing the evidence to answer a question. Also, you may have written a text or an email to a friend telling them what you're doing. Secondly, there's a group of things that you might have written by other people. So we've got a novel to entertain, or a play to entertain, a newspaper which mainly seeks to give information, or an advert to persuade us, usually to buy something. And then there's an autobiography in which the writer seeks to inform us about their lives. Now let's move on to the topic of who's the intended audience when a writer puts pen to paper. Look at page 3. In assessments, you'll probably be asked to work out who the writer considered the most likely audience for the text. You then have to explain why, and you have to use evidence which you've chosen from the text. So, read the top section of page 3 and answer question 4. There'll be answers on the next slide. You had 5 types of text to write about, and you had to come up with features of the various texts. Now, first of all, you had a newspaper article. So firstly, you could have mentioned the special layout of a newspaper. So the writing is set in narrow columns, top to bottom. There are headlines, and there will be photographs often to go along with the stories. There will be articles informing us about various items of news, and these might include interviews. Also look for things like weather reports, features on things like sport or business or travel, and in addition there might be reviews of music, books, film, or the theatre. Next we have a piece of personal reflective writing. So this records the writer's experiences and what they think about these experiences as they reflect back on them. That is, as they look back on what happened. Thirdly, we've got advertisements. These will use various techniques to persuade us to buy something. There might be pictures or various claims being made for the value of the product. Fourthly, we've got a short story or an extract from a novel, so we'd expect a storyline. We call that the plot, and it might have cliffhangers and unexpected twists. Also look for description of setting and description of character. There will be dialogue, that's to say the words spoken by the characters. Now finally, there's a diary entry, and here the writer records things that happened to them day by day, people that they met, and their thoughts about these things. Turn to page 4 now and text 1. Steve Wasn't Going to Die in Bed by Virginia Wheeler, dated 5th September 2006. Wildlife expert David Bellamy last night told of his grief at the loss of crocodile hunter Steve Irwin, but said he was never going to die quietly in his bed. The British botanist David Bellamy called Aussie icon Irwin, killed by a stingray while snorkeling yesterday, a fantastic all-action character. He said, "I had a good cry when I heard the terrible news. Why did it happen to such an important and talented guy? It is the world's loss and has sadly come years too early." Outrageous Irwin, aged 44, won global fame by leaping in the backs of giant crocodiles and grabbing deadly snakes, while crowing in a broad Aussie accent, "Crikey, look at this little beauty." Though one of the world's top naturalists, many of his millions of fans feared he would eventually be killed taking one chance too many with a croc. But he died while filming a bull ray in shallow water at Bat Reef, a remote part of the Great Barrier Reef in northern Queensland. The 5-foot wide stingray, normally a placid creature, suddenly turned on him and speared him through the heart with a lash from the toxic barb in its tail. A plume of blood filled the crystal clear reef water, and Dad of two Irwin, universally loved for his childlike enthusiasm, khaki shorts and huge boots, died almost instantly. Last night it was unclear if he was killed by the wound, a heart attack, poison from the blade-like barb, or a combination of all three. Paramedics tried in vain to revive him, and he was pronounced dead on his boat Croc 1. His death was caught and filmed by a cameraman from his production company who was swimming in front of him. The footage was being studied by police last night. Irwin always told crews to keep shooting even if it looked as if he was going to come off worst in a croc or shark attack. His best friend and manager John Stainton, who witnessed the tragedy, wept as he said, "Steve would have been sad if he died and it wasn't captured on camera. He died doing what he loved best and left this world in a happy and peaceful state of mind. I hope he never felt any pain. The world has lost a great wildlife icon, a passionate conservationist, and one of the proudest dads on the planet. His last words would have been, 'Crocs rule.'" Irwin's American wife Terry, daughter Bindi, 8, and son Bob, age 3, were on holiday in Tasmania when they learned of his death. They flew to Queensland last night and headed for the family home in Miniama on the state's Sunshine Coast. Okay, answer your 2 questions and then check possible answers, which you'll find on the next slide. Now, booklet 1, page 4, text 1, the questions are all about audience. So who would be the most likely to read this? What's the evidence for your opinion? And explain how the evidence helped you. So you've had time to write some detail. What did you come up with? So consider this. The text is about an Australian television presenter who has died tragically in an underwater accident involving a deadly stingray. We could therefore use his nationality or interests to help us answer the audience question. Any of the following answers would be acceptable. Now, one likely audience at the time would certainly be fans of his TV series. Now, these would come literally from all over the world. The evidence is that it says that he had won global fame, that is to say, worldwide fame. His television program at the time was prime television, prime viewing. Secondly, one likely audience for the text would be Australians. We know this because the article is about Steve Irwin, who was an Australian. And the evidence is that he's referred to as an Aussie, and indeed an Aussie icon. Another likely audience for this text would be people who are interested in wildlife. We know this because the article mentions the animals that he studied and kept at his zoo: crocodiles, snakes, and stingrays. Note, there may be many acceptable answers for an audience question, and the main thing is that you're able to pick out evidence from the text and use it to justify your choice and provide a full explanation. Now we're still thinking about audience. We're going to try again using extract 2 from page 6. Same questions again. So we want to determine who would be the most likely audience and what would be the evidence for that. The extract is called The Monkey's Paw. Once you've read this, think carefully about your answers and you can check some answers on the next slide. So we're trying to work out the audience for the extract from The Monkey's Paw on page 6. So firstly, we could start with the question, what type of text is this? Well, this is quite clearly a piece of fiction, but what evidence would we pick out to prove this? A piece of fiction is identifiable because the author will have created atmosphere, setting, and characters. Secondly, fictional writing can have a variety of purposes, but the main one is usually to entertain. So we're saying that the purpose of this text, the extract from The Monkey's Paw, is to entertain. And the evidence that we find is that the author creates a spooky atmosphere using the weather, for example. We're told, quote, "The night was cold and wet," and later, "Listen to the wind." Secondly, we can say that the author describes the characters well. For example, we know that Mrs. White is kind and calm. We're told that she speaks, quote, "soothingly" to her husband, whereas the husband seems to be panicking about the strange visitor. We're told that Mr. White bawled with sudden violence. Or we could comment on the fact that the author describes the setting as being isolated. It's, quote, "an out-of-the-way place." Putting it all together, we could combine all these elements and say, on the subject of audience, that given that the weather is bad and we're told that the house is isolated, we can probably guess that this is going to be a spooky story. So we can say that the most likely audience for this text would be those readers who like a spooky story. In the next 2 lessons, you will work out the likely purpose and audience for a number of texts numbered 3 to 8. You'll find those on the remaining pages in booklet 1. Now for each of the texts, you'll answer the questions that we've been looking at already. First of all, the one to do with purpose. What is the main purpose of the text? Is it to inform? Is it to entertain? Is it mainly to raise debates? Is it to present a point of view? You have to say what your evidence is and explaining that in some detail. Now secondly, you're going to be thinking about the likely audience for the text, and once again you have to provide evidence explaining in detail. Here are some tips to help you as you look at text 3 through to text 8. Purpose. Start by trying to work out what type of text it is by looking at its features. These should help you to work out the purpose. And then after that, audience. Consider what age, nationality and interest would be described as the target audience for each text. E.g., if it uses demanding vocabulary and ideas, then it's more likely to be aimed at adults or older teens. Think about the content. That's the subject and the main ideas of the text. What sort of readers might this be aimed at? As an example, if the text is about Scotland, then it's likely to be of interest to Scots or those who like to visit Scotland. Some texts, of course, are aimed at a very wide audience, appealing to young and old people of all sorts and interests. Here's just a quick reminder for what you're going to do for the next 2 periods. You're going to focus on purpose and audience. There are a total of 6 texts to consider. You're being asked to write down your answers, including the quoted evidence from each text. And you may find it useful to discuss your answers with other pupils. Now, on the following slides, there is audio, and once you've decided what you think, you can check against my comments which I've recorded. Overall, this could take up to 2 lessons, including the reading and the class discussion. Now, on this slide, we're just going to stop for a moment and think about a very important aspect of close reading, and that is having good word power, which is to say having a good stock of words that you understand well and you're able to understand them in your reading, in your listening, but also in your talking and your writing. You should be able to use these confidently. So, word power can be summed up very quickly. It's something that's quite useful to do as a homework. Some classes have a set target, maybe 5 new words every week, and there's basically 4 stages. First of all, you, as a result of your personal reading, write down any unfamiliar word which you find. Secondly, look up any definition or definitions in a good dictionary. Thirdly, make up a sentence and write it down. It has to be one that shows that you understand the meaning of the word. Also, don't forget to try and use the word in conversation with others, and that will help to establish the word in your own mind. So your teacher will advise you about word power, using dictionaries, and just basically trying to build up your word store. If, for example, you were finding 5 new words every week, over S1, 2, 3 and 4, you would actually end up with over 1,000 extra words in your vocabulary, and there's no doubt that that would help you in many different ways. It wouldn't be relevant just to English lessons, but it would help you for all sorts of things. So where you've got time in class, take some time to consider word power and maybe discuss the words that you've been finding in your personal reading. Let's consider the extract from Anne Frank's diary. So the extract is from a girl's diary, and the purpose is to record her day-to-day life, the special occasions and people that she met. Now, what's the evidence? Well, obviously the title, The Diary of Anne Frank, and she records in it the words, "It was my birthday," and lots of the presents and nice things that happened. But of course the name Anne Frank is well known from history. We know that she was a Jewish girl living in dangerous times for Jews. The evidence here is the date, 14th June 1942, her birthday, and it was a time when the Nazis were trying to imprison and kill Jews. These were difficult times, and she obviously felt the need to record her experiences and feelings. The name Anne Frank makes it a diary of global importance. Her story is a familiar one, and if you read the diary, you'll know that she and her family were hiding in secret spaces, scared to make sounds by day when workers were just 1 floor below. So what about the audience? Well, clearly anyone interested in the history of World War II and the terrible dangers faced by the Jews would get an amazing insight into the thoughts and feelings of someone who was at the centre of great danger. Okay, next we've got a second diary, The Secret Diary of Adrian Woolage, 13 3/4, by Sue Townsend. It's not written by Adrian Mole. Clearly Adrian Mole is fictional, and the purpose is still a place where a person will record their thoughts. And in this particular diary, Adrian reveals different aspects of his character. He's very conscious of his age. He's clearly keen to get to 14 and to be very grown up. And he records it as 13 3/4. He's nearly there. He's obviously got a very high opinion of himself. And he talks about the librarian and says, and here's the evidence, perhaps she's an intellectual like me. An intellectual is someone of especially high intelligence, but he has to admit later that, and this is evidence, none of the teachers at school have noticed that I'm an intellectual. They will be sorry when I am famous. So it's funny just to see the thoughts and reflections of the character as he records his life in his diary. He's also very impressed with Pandora. He says, it's time I fell in love. After all, I am 13 3/4 years old. So who would be the audience for this text? And what would the evidence be? Well, clearly it would be aimed at people perhaps of a similar age, maybe going through similar problems. He does record that he's worried about a spot that he has in his face, and he's impressed that the librarian didn't look at my spot, and he's hopeful that it's getting smaller. And really anyone interested in a humorous book and enjoying the different twists and turns of Adrian's life and how he reflects on them. This next text number 5 from page 11 and 12, is called The Other Olympics. And there's a little bit of background in bold writing, probably not part of the original article, but there's then an introduction, and it says that the Paralympics for people with physical disabilities and the Special Olympics for people with learning disabilities enable thousands of athletes to show the world the true meaning of the Olympic spirit. And there's then two parts. The first part goes into the story of the first of these, the Paralympics for people with physical disabilities, and traces its development. And there's a second part that then talks about the Special Olympics, the games for people with learning disabilities, that followed some years later, and again the story is traced. So the purpose is really very straightforward. This is a factual article, and its intention is to inform us about a special side of the World Olympic movement. The evidence for this is the many dates that are given, names of people and places that are connected with the development of both sets of competitions. So secondly, we need to consider the audience. So really anyone who's interested in the history of the Olympic movement, and I would have thought anyone who is interested in the welfare of people with physical disabilities or people with learning difficulties would take a great interest in this amazing story about the competitions that are now available for people of disability. We're on to text number 6, and it's on page 13 in booklet 1, and it has the title Meet Saroja from Armenia, and it's produced by World Vision org UK. So the very first line combined with the photo tells us that, hi, I'm Saroja and I'm waiting for a World Vision child sponsor. And the last line as evidence says, help make a difference to Saroja by sponsoring him today. So there's no doubt about what the purpose is here. World Vision is an organisation working to provide help for young people in parts of the world. It says more evidence here where unemployment and poverty are widespread, and where parents often struggle to provide for their children who are at risk of malnutrition. So it's clear that they're inviting people to send money in and to help sponsor Saroja, and indeed thousands like him who are living lives that are very deprived and in need of financial support. So who would be the likely audience for this? Well, really, it would be aimed at anyone who's in a position to help. So certainly adults would be involved, but very often charities will take small sums of money. So younger people, teenagers, children might be able to contribute some money. So indeed, it's really aimed at anyone who is touched by the story of children living in difficult circumstances in different parts of the world, and who would feel that they might be able to contribute something to making their lives easier. Text 7 has the title £89 million boost for Scotland, and we're told at the top that it comes from a magazine called Pickup, which is the in-house magazine of Glasgow Prestwick Airport. Now, the purpose here is to inform, and the information concerns a massive boost that the Scottish economy has received following on from the decision of airline Ryanair to use Prestwick more and increase incoming flights into Glasgow Prestwick International Airport. So what is the evidence for that? Well, there's lots of details. For example, the researchers calculated that Ryanair's Prestwick flights support 1,500 to 2,000 Scottish jobs, and that the researchers reckoned the average spend in Scotland by visitors was £215 a trip. This was round about the year 2004 to 2005. So there's lots of statistics about increased income, about increased local jobs, and it's very much an informative piece. So what kind of audience would be interested in this? Well, it's an in-house magazine, so people working in Prestwick would be the first audience. Obviously, they're going to be encouraged that the airport is proving successful and that Ryanair is producing a beneficial effect. Employees of Ryanair airline are going to be interested because it focuses on their positive impact. But I guess many different types of people, perhaps economists or politicians, would also take note of these statistics. And so we come to the final article. It's text 8. It's Citizens of the World. There's a short paragraph in bold, which strictly speaking isn't part of the original article. So when you look at the actual article itself, which follows, you can see that the purpose of this is really to examine a modern issue, the issue being multi-ethnic society, And it first of all provides background. For example, there's a paragraph that begins, "Today there are 150 million people living outside their countries of birth. At least 22 million have been forced to move from their homes because of war or racial persecution." So you could say that they're providing fact, but that is really by way of introduction, and really what follows is the main part, where various advantages and disadvantages of multi-ethnic society and immigration are considered, both for the receiving country and also for the countries where the migrants have departed from. So the purpose then is to examine and to debate and look at various aspects of a current political issue. Now, let's consider audience. Who would be interested in an article like this? Basically, the subject matter dictates it. The subject matter is immigration in multi-ethnic society, so really anyone, particularly I would have thought adults, older teenagers who are interested in that subject, would definitely be considered a main target audience. In addition, you might consider people who are involved in planning society and designing new laws, people like politicians and economists. They would also be considered important targets for this piece of writing. So, well done, you've completed booklet number 1. Take time to discuss word power with your teacher, and the basic idea is that really mostly as homework, you should be, as part of your personal reading, be noting any new words that you discover, finding their definitions, using them in a sentence, and also in your conversation. Take the chance where there is time to discuss these words that you find in class with other pupils and with your teacher. You'll find further details of word power at the start of booklet 2, and booklet 2 is next, and it looks at what are called understanding type questions.